I entered in the evening. It was after 6 o'clock, so the gate had to be opened. I was wearing a pair of purple suede high-heeled shoes and I was carrying my budgerigar. They said, "Don't look back," so I kept walking. I never saw my mother again. At the time of her funeral, I watched over the fence as they carried her coffin out of the church opposite and off down the street. We did everything by the bell. We never made a decision. There were no newspapers, no radios, no television. Just poverty, chastity, and obedience. As novices, we called it boot camp, and Mother Superior had God on her side. on silent days, someone would read from a spiritual book while we ate. We'd hear about the lives of the saints and the ancient mystics. But you weren't allowed to use certain words, and one of them was man or men. You couldn't use that word, so you called them creatures.
There was very little recreation, but sometimes we played volleyball, and occasionally we saw a film. We loved the English comedies, and of course all the old Hollywood films. But whenever it got to the romantic part, the sister who was running the projector would put her hand over the lens. So we often missed out on Cary Grant kissing Ingrid Bergman, or whatever.
Once a fortnight, we'd go and see the novice mistress for a short, private interview. You could talk about any difficulties and have your questions explained. Sometimes these sessions were long and difficult, with every little fault pointed out and examined. I disliked these interviews intensely and would come out feeling as though my soul had been scrubbed with a prickly pear.
One day, the novice mistress said to me, "The only place where you can really contact God is at the centre of your soul." Well, I asked her, "What does that mean, the centre of your soul?" She said it was the very deepest, innermost part of you, the core of your being. The difficulty for me, of course, was how to get there.
Cut off from the world, we never made a decision. We did everything by the bell. Not walking around the farm with the same person 2 afternoons in a row. It was called particular friendship. I just thought that it was this funny thing that they had in the convent. There were some people who were certainly very good friends, but I saw it as being filled with the love of God.
Looking back, maybe it was more than that, but I really don't think so.
I remember as a young girl kneeling down and really praying, God, please don't ask me. I don't think I want to. But there was no turning back. I had what they call the calling. It's a feeling. I don't know how to describe it. It's so powerful that it can't be resisted. Even so, I was always planning my escape. But I got seduced, I suppose. Seduced by the monastic way of life. I loved it.
I grew up in a convent, an orphanage. At 9 years old, I decided I wanted to see what God looked like. So one night I snuck out and climbed my favourite tree, a 50-foot cypress that had one long branch that extended like a ladder up into the sky. I sat up in the topmost canopy, looking up at the stars and the wild moon, but I just couldn't see them. So I climbed down and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up, and the branch was gone, hit by lightning in the middle of the night.
A few years earlier, I was drawing chalk out the back. I remember being out of my body, looking down at myself. I was an angel watching this child drawing. I remember flying around the convent garden, around the plants with the butterflies. I felt terribly sad. It took a long time to come back. Years.
For a while, church was the place where I'd show off my new clothes and try out new hairstyles. When in my seat, I'd write plays in my head and pretend I was being interviewed because I was famous. Mum was so proud of my concentration and focus in church. When I received the bread, I'd pretend the aisle back to my seat was a catwalk. The flickering light from the stained glass windows was 1,000 photographers. Church was where I learned to hold my head up high and swing my hips. I saw the nuns that taught us as living objects that could not be touched. I was curious about them, what they wore underneath their habit and stuff like that. I couldn't connect with them. They were in this uniform and I found it hard to approach them.
When I first put the habit on, I thought I was going to hear angels singing and bells ringing. But nothing like that ever happened. Just my ears ringing from all that pressure on my head. I think I had a headache for the 20 years I wore it. I remember feeling terribly top-heavy, like I was going to fall over all the time.
I was eager to put it on because it represented all that I wanted to be. But it was a barrier, a prison, a 17th century garb that cut us off from the world.
The habit was made of 14 yards of heavy black synthetic material. Our heads were shaved, and the headpiece was held together with 14 pins.
They used to scratch their heads a lot. Whenever we had our heads down, reading or writing, and I'd look up, they were always fixing something, a collar, or tucking themselves in, or making sure their rosary beads were still there, or checking the time. I never saw a nun pick her nose, or do anything like that. I did see a nun blow her nose once, and I thought, well, blow me down, look at that. When I was little, I used to think they'd never go to the toilet, because how could they? You know, I thought, well, maybe they don't. Maybe they're not allowed to.
I was enclosed through the 50s and most of the 60s. Sometimes a friend will go, "Do you remember so-and-so?" And I'll say, "No, I don't." And they'll go, "That's funny." And I'll say, "I was in the convent, remember?" Later on, when we started teaching the boarders, they had transistor radios, and they would tell us things. Show us pictures of the Beatles and Elvis. They loved to try and astound us by telling us things. I remember one girl loved Simon and Garfunkel, and for some reason she wanted me to know all their songs. And I loved them. I loved the kinds of subjects they were tackling. like the sounds of silence.
We were desperate to get out. We'd do anything to escape. My boarding school was just outside Wagga Wagga, about a half an hour down the road. Sometimes the nuns walked us into town, but mostly we ran away on our own, racing through the paddocks to get to the fish and chip shop to stock up on cigarettes and scoff a few potato cakes. We had to do it all in an hour. In town we were the freaks, the only dags in school uniform. We'd be shouted at and called lesos. Sometimes we were chased by the army boys who were stationed at the RAAF base on the other side of town.
Shoulders, hands in the air, hands in front, hands on head.
I loathed Sister Assunta. From the back she looked like a crow, and she had a funny smell. She liked to use the strap. Other sisters would give out a warning, send you to the corner, but not Sister Assunta. She'd use it on the spot. She carried her strap on her belt with the rosary beads on one side and the strap on the other.
Hands up those who went to Mass on Sunday. What colour were the priest's robes?
The first time I got the strap was when I got caught in church. We weren't allowed to go in there at lunchtime, but it was cold and wet outside, and we used to sneak in. We'd light all the candles and sit and watch them burn while we ate our lunch. The next year she caught us in the crypt, smoking cigarettes. I don't know, I just had a fascination for fire.
One year this younger nun bounced into the classroom and joked and laughed, and we really didn't know how to react. With the other nuns it was very clear we had to obey them, but with Sister Andrea it wasn't like that. The other kids would stir her, she'd ask us to do something and they'd slam their desk down. They'd throw paper balls at her and roll inkwells across the floor so the ink would splatter everywhere. And she'd just turn away. I mean, she was young. She just didn't know how to cope with this behaviour. I remember sitting back and thinking, why are they doing this? It was the first time I saw a nun as a person. lunchtime. It was a very windy day. I asked her to play skivvy with us. I'll never forget that day.
I loved Sister Andrea. She wasn't like the other nuns. She taught us history and told us these fantastic stories. One day she told us about Joan of Arc. She said Joan of Arc was her favourite saint, that one day she walked to the top of the hill where she heard voices, the voices of saints and angels. The voices told her to lead the French army into battle against the English, which she did. And they won! Then she got handed over to the English. The church said she was a witch. And they burned her at the stake. Sister Andrea said lots of people were burned at the stake. Anyone could be accused. If you were old, single, a midwife, or even a little bit strange. She said that women were burnt most of all, 9 million in 300 years.
799 AD, we find on record a custom whereby the new pope undergoes a test, lest a woman should ever again, by deception, gain the office of the pontiff. The new pope sits upon a seat of red stone that has a large hole cut in the bottom. The populace of Rome believed that the examination was carried out by two of the clergy, who, when perceiving that the pope was all intact, would shout out,